Cedar Ridge, a revolution over ribs. It was supposed to be a simple Sunday BBQ. Nothing grand, nothing loud. Just me, my smoker, a few steaks and some ribs, slow cooking while my old college buddy Darren played cornhole with my neighbor's kids. I had country music humming low from the speaker set on the porch rail and a cooler filled with soda and local beer on ice. It was one of those early spring afternoons that felt like a small reward for surviving another gray winter. The kind of day where you breathe deep, sip slow, and finally feel like life is on your side. That's when she came. Karen Dunn, president of our HOA and unofficial queen of Cedar Ridge Estates, stormed down my driveway like I'd just declared secession from the neighborhood. She was wearing her usual uniform, high-waisted khakis, a red windbreaker with the HOA logo, and a Bluetooth headset she never seemed to use. I didn't even hear her walk up. It was Darren who nudged me. "Hey, you got a storm incoming," he whispered, glancing behind me. I turned and saw her scowling at the smoke rising from my Traeger. "Mr. Langford," she barked. She never once called me Ryan, despite living 3 doors down for 5 years. "You are in violation of HOA Section 4.8b, which strictly prohibits excessive smoke-producing activities on private lots." I blinked. Excessive what smoke? Odor. "Grilling is only permitted with charcoal in contained devices and only if it does not create a nuisance to adjacent properties. And you?" She waved dramatically toward the wisps of delicious mesquite smoke curling over the fence, "are creating a nuisance." I looked around. The Jensen kids 2 houses over were still jumping on their trampoline. And Mrs. Talley, my elderly neighbor, was on her porch, waving at us with her iced tea in hand. No one looked bothered. "It's just a family BBQ," I said evenly. "It's my backyard. I'm not disturbing anyone." Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice. "The HOA received a complaint from 2 separate board members." I almost laughed. "You mean you and your husband?" "That's irrelevant," she snapped. "I'm giving you a verbal warning. Shut it down or you'll be cited." I stood there, spatula still in hand, ribs just starting to get that beautiful crust. "On what grounds?" Karen pointed to a thick binder she always carried, like it was a holy book. "As HOA president, I'm authorized to issue immediate corrective orders for any violations." "That's funny," I said, flipping a steak gently, "because I actually read that binder once. Doesn't say anything about you being judge, jury, and executioner." Her lips tightened. "This is your last warning." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized then that this had nothing to do with smoke, or bylaws, or even her supposed authority. This was about control. Control over every hedge, every mailbox, color, every basketball hoop, placement. And apparently now over brisket. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, but because the smell of burning meat was making me sick to my stomach, not from the food, but from the bitter taste of power wielded poorly. Darren saw it in my face. So did the neighbors, now starting to drift inside like kids caught in a thunderstorm. I shut the lid on the grill, killed the music, slid the cooler under the patio table. And I watched Karen walk away like she'd won a war she never should have started. That night, I stood in my kitchen, scraping fat from the tray, the house silent, except for the sound of my dog Moose licking the floor where juice had spilled. I was angry, but not loud angry. Not throw something angry. I was simmering, controlled, focused, because I knew one thing about power: it can be challenged, and I had every intention of doing just that. But not in the way Karen expected. I woke the next morning to the sound of tires rolling over gravel and the dull thump of paper hitting my front porch. The sun had barely crested the rooftops, and I was still in my flannel pajama pants and t-shirt, cradling my first cup of coffee. I opened the door, expecting a newspaper. Instead, I found a manila envelope with the HOA's crimson stamp on it, not even sealed, just folded and stuffed like a backhanded insult. I didn't need to read it to know what it was, but I did. Notice of violation. Level 2. Infraction, screamed the heading in bold 16-point font. Below it was a list of supposed offenses I'd committed during my Sunday BBQ, typed in clinical legalese and layered with the kind of arrogance only bureaucrats and petty tyrants possess. Unauthorized outdoor cooking activity, violation of noise guidelines, Section 3.7c, creation of air quality, disturbance, Section 4.8b. Non-compliance, after verbal warning, failure to submit event notice to board for approval. The letter went on to state that I was subject to a $250 fine, with the possibility of accruing $50 per day if the issue was deemed ongoing or unresolved. It also noted that repeat offenses could result in lien placement against the property. They were threatening to put a lien on my house because I grilled some ribs. At the bottom of the letter was Karen Dunn's signature, written in precise, looping cursive, followed by the HOA board's seal, and a timestamp, 7:58 p.m. Less than 2 hours after she'd marched off my lawn, she had already drafted this. She hadn't even given herself time to brush the smoke off her jacket. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head, as I held the letter up to the kitchen light. Moose looked up at me from his bed, in the corner like he could smell the trouble. "You believe this crap," I muttered. "We're living in a prison with flower beds. I didn't have time for this. I had work to do. Freelance design jobs, a Zoom call at noon with a client in Denver, and a stack of email campaigns to build for a nonprofit I'd been helping on weekends. I wasn't exactly lounging around with nothing better to do than fight a neighborhood dictatorship. But this was now personal. I folded the letter back up and laid it on the table. Then I opened my laptop. I started by searching for the HOA's founding documents, the original covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC&Rs, which were public record when I bought the house. I found the PDF buried 3 layers deep on the HOA's outdated website, 87 pages of bylaws, appendices, footnotes, and legalese. But I was used to parsing language for meaning. Contracts were part of my freelance world. I'd seen how one comma could cost someone a deal. I made a fresh cup of coffee and started highlighting. 2 hours in, I'd found something interesting. Section 5, tucked away under use of common spaces, contained a clause I hadn't noticed before. Homeowners in good standing may reserve designated common spaces for community events subject to city regulations and approval from local authorities. No mention of the HOA board having veto power. No definition of community events. And nothing that said the event had to be organized by the HOA. I sat back in my chair, heart ticking like a slow drumbeat. They wanted to play rules, I'd play rules. But I wouldn't fight fire with fire. That would be giving Karen exactly what she wanted, another outburst she could weaponize. No, I'd do something worse. I'd out-host her. I'd make my next BBQ completely legal, public, festive, unstoppable. And I wouldn't host it in my backyard. I'd host it right on HOA property, the same patch of manicured lawn behind the Cedar Ridge Clubhouse, where they held their wine and cheese mixers every second Friday. I knew that lawn. Everyone did. It sat at the center of the neighborhood like a smug little reminder that the HOA controlled more than our fees, it controlled our togetherness. But not this time. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and started scribbling ideas. Date, time, title. Permits. Music, food trucks, bounce house. I was getting ahead of myself, but that was the point. I wanted this to be so much more than retaliation. I wanted it to be joy, laughter, legally sanctioned rebellion. I wasn't just planning a BBQ anymore. I was planning a community uprising with grill marks. But first, I needed to be sure. I opened a new browser tab and typed in city event permit applications. There, it was a clean, simple page from the county website listing the steps, fees, and turnaround time. I could apply online, and as long as I had insurance and proof of residence, I could hold a gathering on any publicly accessible, non-restricted space in the neighborhood, including HOA-maintained areas. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from adrenaline. Karen wanted a war of paperwork. I'd give her a masterclass in compliance. I clicked Download Application, and I smiled. It's strange how fast your life can shift from routine to strategy. Just 48 hours earlier, I'd been flipping burgers and sipping craft beer under the sun. Now I was knee-deep in HOA legalese, taking margin notes like a law student preparing for the bar. The HOA bylaws weren't just vague. They were a patchwork of inconsistent clauses, contradictory statements, and provisions likely copied from another HOA's template and never reviewed. I sat at my kitchen table past midnight that night, with 3 highlighters, a cup of strong coffee, and a Google Doc open where I'd begun compiling what I half-jokingly titled the People's BBQ Defense File. I focused on every line related to community use of land homeowner rights and the extent of the board's power to restrict gatherings. It didn't take long to realize something crucial. Most of the power the HOA wielded came not from the written rules, but from the residents' lack of awareness. Take Section 4.8, the one Karen had mentioned when shutting down my BBQ. It referenced excessive smoke or odor that creates a nuisance, but didn't define the term nuisance. There were no thresholds listed, no measurements, no enforcement criteria. It was a scare tactic disguised as policy. More interesting was Section 5.2, the one I'd found earlier, allowing homeowners to host community access events on common use land. That clause had footnotes leading to city ordinances, and when I traced them back, they painted a picture Karen clearly hoped no one would discover HOA land, while managed by the association, was still technically subject to city permitting and citizen access, especially for gatherings deemed public and non-commercial. In plain English, if I followed city guidelines and filed a permit for a neighborhood BBQ on HOA land, Karen couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. By Tuesday morning, I had a plan. I took the day off from client work, put on a collared shirt, and drove down to the city permit office. It was a faded brick building near the courthouse with a row of flower pots. Someone clearly tried very hard to keep alive in the brutal spring sun. Inside, it was quiet, clean, and smelled faintly like toner and lemon disinfectant. A woman named Denise sat behind the glass window at the counter. Her hair was pulled back in a high bun, and she wore a badge that read Community Events Officer, Denise R. She looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I hope so," I said, sliding my completed application under the glass. "I'm planning a community BBQ and want to reserve space in my HOA's shared lawn." She glanced at the form, then back at me. "HOA space, you got board approval. That's the thing," I said, keeping my tone even. According to City Ordinance 12-311, and my HOA's CC&Rs, specifically Clause 5.2, homeowners in good standing can request access to common land provided city permits are secured. She raised her eyebrows. "You came prepared?" I smiled. I had some encouragement. Denise reviewed the paperwork. "This looks in order. You've already got event insurance, bound through Lemonwood Mutual. Coverage included fire liability and property. PDF attached to page 2. She chuckled softly. "You're either a lawyer or someone with a serious grudge. Let's call it barbecue justice." She typed something into her computer, then printed out a temporary permit. "You're good to go, pending inspection. The fire marshal will swing by Friday to confirm layout. Events listed for Sunday afternoon, right?" "Yes, ma'am." 3 to 8 p.m. with music ending promptly by 7. "You've done this before." "First time," I said, "but I've been to enough HOA meetings to learn the fine art of red tape." Back in my car, I stared at the permit in my hands. A single sheet of white paper with a barcode and city seal, but it felt like a weapon. Not one built on revenge. One built on clarity. The next step was the fun part. I designed the flyer that night. Not digital, not social, just good old-fashioned print. I wanted something people could hold tack on their fridge share by hand. It featured a cartoon drawing of a smiling grill with smoke rising big block letters reading, "Cedar Ridge Community, BBQ, hosted by your neighbor, Ryan Langford. This Sunday on HOA Commons lawn, yes, that lawn music. Games, ribs, Joy BYO chair. We'll bring the fire." Then in smaller print, at the bottom, "This event is fully permitted by the City of Fairview and open to all neighborhood residents. No HOA approval necessary. Just bring your appetite." By Thursday, I'd handed out 86 flyers, stuck a few on community mailboxes, and slipped one into the drop box outside the HOA office, addressed, of course, to Karen Dunn. I heard nothing for 2 days. Then Friday morning, I saw Karen in her SUV parked outside the clubhouse, arms folded, staring down the fire marshal as he walked the lawn tape measure in hand. Her posture was rigid, her lips pressed into a white line. She didn't yell, she didn't protest, but I could tell she was planning her next move. Let her, I thought. The pit was ordered, The permits were posted, the brisket was marinating. This wasn't just a barbecue anymore. It was a line in the grass, and for once, I was on the right side of it. I almost didn't go to the HOA meeting. The event was held the first Friday of every month at 6 p.m. Sharp in the Cedar Ridge Clubhouse, an air-conditioned beige box with stiff metal chairs, fluorescent lights, and a relentless smell of lemon air freshener mixed with printer ink. It was the kind of place where complaints went to die, where decisions were made before a single word was spoken, and where HOA President Karen Dunn presided like a judge in a courtroom where only one voice mattered, hers. But this time was different. I had something in my hand that didn't just challenge her authority, it undermined the very illusion of it. I showed up 10 minutes early, wearing my nicest jeans and a clean button-up, freshly pressed. In one hand was a copy of my city-approved event permit, neatly laminated. In the other, a folder with the HOA bylaws I had marked in 5 different highlighters. The room was already half full, mostly retirees who came to these things religiously, either to voice grievances about kids skateboarding too loudly, or to nod approvingly at Karen's reports about mulch budgets and lawn fertilizer contracts. There was a table set up in front with the full board seated Karen in the center, flanked by Vice President Mark Dillinger, Treasurer Susan Ray, and the ever-silent Secretary Dave. Karen wore her signature red windbreaker, the same one she'd marched down my driveway in, zipped up to her neck, as if she were ready for battle. I took a seat in the second row, in full view of the board, and calmly placed the laminated permit on the empty chair beside me. Karen's eyes flicked to it. She didn't blink, but I saw her jaw twitch. The meeting began like clockwork approval of minutes updates on landscaping contracts, a reminder about dog leash violations. It was the same performative dance, until the final item on the agenda. Any new business from homeowners? Karen asked, glancing at the sign-up sheet. I stood up before anyone else could. Ryan Langford, I said. Lot 47. A few people turned. A couple smiled. Karen's expression didn't change, but I could sense the tension in her shoulders. You have 3 minutes, she said flatly. I walked to the front, took a breath, and addressed the room, not just the board. Good evening. I'd like to speak about the HOA's recent handling of my backyard barbecue this past Sunday, which was shut down mid-event and followed up by a violation letter threatening daily fines and potential legal action. There was a quiet murmur from the crowd. I let it sit. I've since reviewed our bylaws in depth. I continued holding up the color-coded folder, and I'd like to point out a particular section that allows homeowners to reserve and use HOA common space for community access events, provided they follow local city regulations, which I have. I opened the folder and pulled out the laminated permit, holding it up for the board and everyone else to see. This Sunday, from 3 to 8 p.m., I'll be hosting a community BBQ on the HOA-maintained common lawn behind the clubhouse. The event is fully permitted by the City of Fairview. I've met all the safety requirements, secured liability insurance, and notified the necessary agencies. This is a legal, community-focused gathering open to all Cedar Ridge residents. Karen's pen froze in her hand. Mark coughed awkwardly. Susan shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But Karen, she smiled. It was that tight, practiced HOA smile, the kind that said, I'm not mad. I'm just plotting your ruin quietly. Mr. Langford, she began, her voice silky, while we appreciate your enthusiasm, your permit is irrelevant to this board's policies. The HOA governs what is acceptable on our shared property, regardless of what the city allows. I stepped closer just enough to make sure every word landed. With all due respect, that's not what Section 5.2 of the CC&R says. I'm happy to read it aloud for everyone here. I opened the folder again and read slowly, clearly. Homeowners in good standing may reserve designated common spaces for community events subject to city regulations and approval from local authorities. Not a word about board approval, not a single clause granting Karen veto power. The room was silent. And then someone in the back, I think it was Mrs. Talley, chuckled softly. That tiny sound broke something. Karen's expression cracked. Her lips parted just slightly, her nostrils flared. This board will be reviewing your permit with our legal counsel, she said tersely. If any rules are violated, we reserve the right to take corrective action. I look forward to it, I replied, smiling. And I'll have the full text of our CC&Rs printed and available for anyone attending, along with pulled pork sliders. A few people laughed. Not loud, but enough. Enough to shift the weight in the room. Karen moved on, but the rest of the meeting passed in a haze. I returned to my seat, adrenaline still humming in my chest. When the meeting adjourned, a few neighbors patted my shoulder, asked what they could bring, offered to help set up chairs. I stayed behind just long enough to watch Karen pack up her binder in silence. She didn't look at me, but I caught a glimpse of her hand. It trembled slightly as she zipped her bag shut. I walked out into the cool night air, the sky stretched with stars and the promise of smoke and laughter in just 2 days' time. Karen wanted control. But what she didn't understand, not yet, was that real power doesn't come from a title or a binder. It comes from people standing up, together. The morning after the board meeting, I woke up before the sun. It wasn't nerves. It wasn't even adrenaline. It was purpose. I poured my coffee, pulled on a hoodie, and sat at the dining table where the laminated permit still lay beside my laptop like a medal from a battle just beginning. I stared at it for a moment. The date, Sunday. That was 2 days away, 48 hours. Enough time to light something bigger than a grill, a movement. Because now it wasn't just about me. It was about every neighbor who'd whispered frustration over HOA fines for faded mailbox paint. Every mom who'd been told she couldn't chalk on the sidewalk with her kids. Every dad forced to take down a backyard swing set for non-uniform design. It was about the people who had swallowed Karen's rules for years just to keep the peace. And now I was offering them something simple, a reason to say no more. Not with anger, not with protests, with ribs, with laughter, with folding chairs and lemonade and music drifting across the lawn like resistance in disguise. I pulled out my legal pad and started sketching a full layout for the event. 12:00 p.m. Setup begins. Tables pop up tents, 2 large smokers' coolers pre-packed. I'd already lined up my friend Marcus to bring his portable stage for the acoustic duo he managed. They were excited, said it was their first gig in months. 3:00 p.m. Official start time. Music on, grills lit. Welcome table with flyers, a guest book, and yes, a printed copy of the HOA bylaws, bookmarked at section 5.2 in bold. 4:00 to 6:00 p.m. Meal service. Pulled pork sliders, smoked chicken, mac and cheese. Neighbors had started messaging me with side dish offers, potato salad, cornbread, peach cobbler. A woman on Cedar View Lane said she'd bring a cotton candy machine her daughter used for birthday parties. 6:30 p.m. Open mic community hour. I wanted stories, laughter. People getting up to talk about what they loved about the neighborhood, what they missed, what they dreamed it could be again. 8:00 p.m. Shutdown. Clean sweep. We would leave the lawn cleaner than we found it. No trash, no complaints, just the scent of wood smoke fading gently into the air. I emailed Denise at the city events office with a final draft of the layout and updated food service plans. She responded within an hour, approved. You're good to go, Mr. Langford. Also save me a plate if I stop by. By noon, I began designing new flyers this time, with the full lineup, a map of the event, and a new title at the top. The People's Picnic, a community BBQ to celebrate us. Simple, inviting, unthreatening on the surface. But under it, the truth sizzled. That afternoon, I printed 200 color copies at the Office Depot across town. I wanted these to be everywhere. Not just on mailbox posts, but at the grocery store corkboard, on windshields, in the school pickup line, in the windows of the corner cafe. As I pinned the first flyer on the community board outside the clubhouse, I noticed the door was ajar. Inside voices. Karen's voice. He's trying to embarrass this board. If we don't respond, it'll look like we're weak. Mark's voice. But the permit is real, Karen. We checked. The city confirmed. It doesn't matter. There are still HOA decorum rules. We can issue warnings to attendees if they bring amplified sound or serve unapproved food. You want to fine everyone who shows up? No, she snapped. I want to remind them who's in charge. I stepped back before I could be seen. She wasn't planning to stop the BBQ. She was planning to poison it, with fear. And that's when the next part of my plan fell into place. Saturday morning, I called in a few favors. Marcus connected me with a local reporter from the Fairview Gazette, a woman named Talia, who loved community stories with a twist. I told her about the permit, the lawn, the flyers. I didn't need her to take sides. I just wanted her there, watching, asking questions, maybe with a camera. Then I called a local food bank, told them we'd be collecting donations at the event, non-perishables, toiletries, baby formula, something bigger than barbecue. By the afternoon, I'd secured 2 folding tables, 3 donation bins, and a custom sign, "Give back while we grill. Donations, welcome for the Fairview Family Pantry." Even if the HOA hated every second of it, even if Karen stood on the edge of the lawn with a clipboard and a grimace, she would be standing in front of hope, in front of charity, in front of a families sharing food and passing kindness in foil trays. And if she tried to ruin that, let the cameras roll. Saturday night, I walked the lawn where it would all happen. The air was warm and the grass had just been cut, crisp lines mowed by a teenager named Luis, who saw me and gave a thumbs up. "You really doing this tomorrow?" he asked. "Every bit of it," I said. He grinned. "My grandma says she's bringing tamales." I laughed. "Tell her to bring 10. They'll go fast." As I stood there watching the porch lights flicker on one by one around the neighborhood, I didn't feel like I was planning a stunt. I felt like I was reclaiming something. Not just the right to grill, the right to gather, to celebrate, to belong. And I wasn't alone. By sunrise on Sunday, it felt like the neighborhood had been holding its breath all week and finally exhaled, not in frustration, but in anticipation. The air buzzed with something more than caffeine and pollen. It was the low hum of people realizing they didn't have to ask permission to be human. I had barely stepped out my front door when my phone buzzed. Marcus had arrived early already, unloading gear from the back of his van, folding chairs, mic stands, a battery-powered amp, and that collapsible wooden stage he built in his garage during the pandemic. The guy worked fast. When I reached the lawn 10 minutes later, he had music playing from a Bluetooth speaker and was taping off his performance zone with bright orange flags. "You nervous?" he asked, handing me a roll of caution tape. "Only if Karen shows up before the ribs are done," I said, tying the tape to a low-hanging branch. "Bro." Marcus grinned. "This is the most exciting thing to happen in a HOA community since somebody tried to start a book club and accidentally picked 50 Shades of Grey." We laughed, and that set the tone. Not defiant, not angry, joyful. By 9 a.m., I had a full crew of volunteers, neighbors I barely knew before this week. One of them, Tasha, lived 6 houses down and showed up in an apron and rubber gloves. "I heard you might need help prepping," she said. And before I could answer, she was already pulling out aluminum trays of chopped onion slaw and 6 dozen deviled eggs. "I hope you brought backups for these," I joked, because they might not survive the first hour. At 10:30 a.m., the donations table went up with bins labeled canned goods, baby needs, and household essentials. Someone had printed a poster that read, "Neighbors helping neighbors, no HOA approval required." I didn't ask who made it. I just taped it to the front of the table. By noon, the lawn had transformed. A dozen pop-up tents lined the edges, shading crock pots, trays of brisket watermelon slices, baked beans, and pies in every flavor imaginable. Kids were already running barefoot on the grass, tossing frisbees and giggling as they chased bubbles from a $20 machine someone brought at the last minute. And just like that, the neighborhood came alive. No fines, no warnings, no permission slips, just people. The first official guest arrived around 2:45. Mrs. Talley, pushing her walker, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and holding a tin of lemon bars. "Smells like my childhood," she said, eyes shining. By 3:15, the lawn was full. Folding chairs, blankets, families who hadn't spoken to each other in years. People from streets I'd never driven down waved across the crowd, balancing plates on their laps and wiping sauce from their kids' cheeks. The band started playing soft bluegrass, at first, then a few folk covers. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried just enough to fill the air between conversations. Then came the moment I knew would happen, the arrival of Karen Dunn. She stepped onto the lawn in her signature windbreaker, clipboard in hand, flanked by Mark and Susan. Dave, the secretary, trailed behind them like a man who regretted every decision that led to this moment. They didn't walk with the confidence of enforcers. They walked like people hoping not to be noticed, but they were. Karen tried to appear casual, glancing at the stage, the grills, the overflowing donations table. But her eyes couldn't hide it. She was scanning, looking for violations, weak spots, an excuse to pounce. I met her halfway across the lawn. "Karen," I said, holding out a plate, "try the cornbread. It's award-winning." She ignored the plate. "Mr. Langford," she said, her voice tight, "we're observing the event to ensure compliance with HOA guidelines." I gestured around us. "As you can see, it's a community access event on common property, all in accordance with Section 5.2 and City Permit number 4319. I have extra copies if you need one." She didn't answer. But Mark looked around and muttered, "Looks pretty peaceful to me." Susan nodded. "And the food smells amazing." Karen shot them both a glare. Then behind us came a flash, a camera. I turned to see Talia, the reporter from the Fairview Gazette, snapping photos beside the donation table. She wore jeans, sunglasses, and a press badge. She caught my eye, gave a wink, and whispered, "Great turnout. This'll be a good story." Karen saw her too, and I swear for the first time since I'd known her, she flinched. She couldn't shut it down. She couldn't issue threats. Not now. Not without looking like the villain. Not with a reporter standing on the same lawn capturing images of joy, charity, and community spirit. I leaned in a little closer to Karen and said quietly, "You're welcome to stay. There's pulled pork with your name on it." Her lips parted like she wanted to say something cutting. Instead, she turned and walked away, clipboard held against her chest like a shield. I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. Because the music kept playing, the grills kept sizzling, and the people, my neighbors, kept laughing. The community had arrived. Not for rebellion, but for reunion, and it was beautiful. The mood on the lawn was electric, like some unspoken switch had been flipped, and everyone realized they'd been waiting for this gathering far longer than they knew. The kids didn't stop running. The older folks stayed longer than they usually did outside. Laughter floated in waves. Even the sun cooperated, golden and soft, like it had RSVP'd too. But the warmth wouldn't last. Around 4:20 p.m., just as Marcus introduced a local teenage singer for a short acoustic set, I spotted two unfamiliar faces stepping onto the far end of the lawn, tall, rigid posture, khaki uniforms. No badges, private security. Karen had called backup. I didn't panic. I stayed near the food line, scooping brisket onto a plate for a kid who could barely hold it, but I tracked their movement. The two guards walked with that unmistakable purpose, not there to enjoy themselves, not there to eat. They were scanning. And behind them, striding like a general to a battlefield, was Karen now, without her clipboard, but with a rolled-up copy of the HOA charter clenched like a scroll of war. She stopped at the edge of the music circle, where chairs surrounded the little stage. She said something to one of the guards, who nodded and headed directly toward the amp. I stepped in front of him. "Afternoon," I said calmly. "Can I help you?" "This equipment is in violation of community noise protocols," he said, not looking me in the eye. "No amplified music after 7 p.m., I reminded him. "It's 422, city permitted. Signed off by the marshal. Volume within legal limits." He looked uncertain for a second. The second guard joined him, checking his phone. I caught a glimpse he was scrolling through the HOA bylaws, like he was cramming for a pop quiz. Karen stood behind them, arms folded. "I need you to step aside," the first one said, firmer now. "We've been directed to begin sound equipment removal." I didn't move. But I didn't raise my voice either. "Unless you've got a city revocation order or a court injunction," I said, "you're interfering with a permitted event on public record HOA common ground." That did it. The words weren't just true, they were precise. Legal. The kind of language that makes people pause. "I have authority from the HOA board," Karen snapped, pushing past the guards. Now others were watching. Conversations quieted. Someone turned the music down, but didn't stop it. "This event is unlawful," she said. "The HOA never approved it, and you did not submit the required community intent form." I turned toward the growing semicircle of neighbors behind me. "Karen, we've been over this. The city permit overrides your community intent form." The bylaws allow any resident in good standing to host a public event if it's compliant with city regulations. You know this. You were at the meeting. I don't care what the city says, she said, eyes flashing. This is our property. No, I said. This is everyone's property. And for once, everyone is using it. That struck something. Maybe it was the tone, maybe the words, or maybe the 30 pairs of eyes now looking at her not with fear, but with something she'd rarely seen in her long HOA reign defiance. A voice rose from the crowd. Karen, sit down. It was Mrs. Talley, seated under a pink umbrella, with a plate in her lap, deviled eggs balanced perfectly. Someone else added, we like this. Leave it alone. Karen turned slowly, her face cracking into disbelief. These were her allies, her voters. She'd spent years commanding loyalty by being the only one who ever bothered to show up. But today they were all here. And she wasn't leading anything. I'm calling the city, she hissed. We'll see if they like you using our lawn for a political stunt. Go ahead, I said, smiling. Denise from Permits already stopped by. Had some pulled chicken. She loved it. Karen's jaw twitched, and then came the final blow. Talia, the reporter, stepped forward from the crowd with her camera raised. Miss Dunn, could I get a quick comment for the Gazette? We're doing a story on community unity and event permits, especially in HOA-managed neighborhoods. How does it feel to see such strong turnout from your residents? Karen's face went pale. For a split second, I saw her brain flip through every option, storm off, make a scene, snatch the microphone, and rant. But she didn't. She turned without a word, snapped her fingers at the security guys, and walked off the lawn. The two guards lingered for a beat. Then they turned and followed her, their job suddenly uncertain. As the tension melted away, the singer strummed a few hopeful chords. A cheer erupted, not loud, but genuine. The music picked back up, the ribs kept smoking, and the donations table began to overflow. But most importantly, no one left. That was what stuck with me. After all the drama, all the pressure, and all the false authority waved in people's faces, the crowd stayed. No one packed up, no one panicked, no one let fear win. They just passed more plates, shared more stories. And in the middle of it all, I found myself behind the grill again, flipping burgers for a kid who asked, "Can we do this every Sunday?" I smiled. We just might. By 5:00 p.m. The sun was beginning its gentle descent, washing the neighborhood in golden light that made everything look like it was lifted from a magazine cover. The HOA's once pristine common lawn had transformed into something utterly unrecognizable in the best way possible. It looked alive. Laughter rolled across the crowd in waves. The grills hissed and popped, with meat sizzling in their final stretch toward perfect char. Fold-out tables sagged slightly under the weight of shared potluck dishes, ribs, deviled eggs, pulled pork, vegan chili, 3 different kinds of mac and cheese. Kids darted between chairs with ketchup-stained cheeks, and someone's golden retriever had made himself the unofficial mayor of the BBQ, weaving from group to group, tail high. By that point, at least 300 people had shown up, maybe more. Word had spread faster than I could have predicted. Neighbors invited neighbors who invited cousins who brought coworkers. And the surprising part, nobody complained. Not about the crowd, not about the music, not even about the parking. I overheard one older man, Mr. Pollard, I think, turn to his wife and say, "This is what neighborhoods used to feel like." She nodded, her hand resting on his knee. And there in the midst of it all was the one thing Karen couldn't regulate, fine, or shut down: joy. The music continued. 2 teenagers performed a surprisingly solid acoustic version of "Take Me Home, Country Roads," and even the stone-faced Dave from the HOA board tapped his foot along. Kids lined up for temporary tattoos from a booth someone set up last minute. Over by the stage, someone had dragged a foldable table into a full-blown art station for children, complete with markers, glitter glue, and construction paper. One sign taped to the front read, "Make a card for someone you love, or for someone who needs one." People made both. I walked toward the donation bins next, which were overflowing with canned vegetables, boxes of diapers, bags of rice, and pasta, and a growing stack of toiletries. Denise from the city had indeed stopped by earlier, and true to her email, she left with a paper plate stacked with pulled pork and 2 cupcakes. Before leaving, she shook my hand and whispered, "This isn't just a BBQ, it's a blueprint." That stuck with me. Because she was right. This whole event, born from spite, forged by resistance, had become something more powerful than anything I could have designed alone. The neighbors didn't just show up, they participated. They took ownership of it. And then came the moment I didn't see coming. It was around 6:45 p.m., and I had just sat down for the first time all day, a cold bottle of soda in hand, plate on my lap, a view of the whole lawn laid out before me like a living mosaic. That's when someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was Mark, the HOA vice president. He was holding a small white paper plate with 1 slice of pecan pie on it. "Got room for one more?" he asked. I gestured to the seat beside me, surprised. Always. He sat down sighing like a man 20 years older than he probably was. "I'll admit it," he said. "You pulled something off here. I waited. I voted with Karen to shut your backyard BBQ down," he continued. "But I didn't expect this. Nobody did. That was the point," I said. He took a bite of pie and chewed thoughtfully. "She's not taking this well. I noticed. She'll probably try to hold an emergency board meeting. Maybe claim you misused HOA space. Try to drum up violations. I've documented everything I said calmly. Emails, permits, photos, and, well, Talia's here." He glanced at the reporter still snapping pictures near the food line and gave a quiet chuckle. "Yeah, saw that." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Mark said, "We've never had this many people at a HOA-sponsored event. Not even close." "Because this isn't a HOA-sponsored event," I said, looking around. "It's a people-sponsored one." He nodded, wiping his hands with a napkin. "Maybe it's time we rethink how we run this place." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. Then came the open mic. Marcus took the little stage around 700 and cleared his throat into the mic. "All right, folks. Before we wrap up, we've got something called Community Hour. That's a fancy way of saying if you've got something to say, come say it." The first few were light, a dad with a dad joke, a kid who sang the chorus of Old Town Road before running off in a fit of giggles. Then came an older woman named Iris, who stood up with a cane and said, "This is the first time I've sat outside past 6 in years without feeling like I was bothering someone. Thank you." Then Tasha, the neighbor, who brought deviled eggs, took the mic. She was holding a toddler on her hip. "My husband and I moved here during the pandemic," she said, voice trembling. "We never felt like we belonged. Not until today. This is the first time Cedar Ridge has felt like home." There were tears in the crowd, hugs, applause. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The lawn spoke for me. The sun dipped lower, casting a soft amber hue across the grass. The grills went quiet. The music faded into soft background hum, and neighbors began folding up chairs, packing leftovers, exchanging phone numbers, promising game nights and potlucks and porch visits. We cleaned everything, left no trace, but the scent of smoked oak, and a community reignited. And just before the last table was folded, a small boy with chocolate on his face ran up to me and tugged my shirt. "Mr. Ryan," he said, "can we do this again tomorrow?" I crouched to his level. "Not tomorrow, buddy," I smiled. "But real soon." And I meant it. Because now we weren't just neighbors. We were neighbors who showed up. Monday morning came with a kind of silence that felt earned, the kind that follows the chaos of something joyful and unexpected. My body ached in ways I hadn't felt in years. My hands smelled faintly of mesquite and lemon-scented wipes, and my front yard still held the lingering scent of wood smoke. But it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that comes from having done something right. The first email hit my inbox before I'd even finished my coffee. Subject: response to unauthorized use of HOA property, Karen, of course. I clicked it open, expecting fury. What I found was something colder. "Mr. Langford, the HOA board is currently conducting an investigation into your use of common property for Sunday's event, which, while allegedly city permitted, was not formally submitted to or reviewed by this board. As such, we are evaluating the potential application of Section 6.3 of the HOA bylaws, which prohibits unapproved public events that may cause undue wear to shared spaces or liability to the community. You are hereby instructed to cease any further planning of neighborhood events until a full board vote is conducted. Sincerely, Karen Dunn's President, Cedar Ridge, HOA. No greeting. No acknowledgement of the 3 overflowing bins of food we donated to the local pantry. No mention of the attendance, the order, the fact that not a single incident or complaint had been reported. Just the tone of someone clinging to control, trying desperately to put the toothpaste back in the tube. But it was too late, because someone had already posted a video. I found it through a neighborhood Facebook group called Cedar Ridge Locals, usually reserved for garage sale announcements and coyote sightings. Someone had uploaded a 3-minute clip with the caption, "HOA Karen tries to shut down charity, BBQ reporter was rolling." I clicked it expecting maybe a moment or two of awkwardness. Instead, I got Karen in all her unfiltered glory mid-tantrum. The video started just as she approached the amp's setup, flanked by her 2 security guards. Her voice was shrill, her words sharp. "This is private property," she barked, arms slicing the air. "I don't care what your little permit says." Then came the golden moment. The camera panned as Talia, the reporter, approached and asked with polite clarity, "Miss Dunn, how do you respond to the city's approval of this event? Do you believe the community's turnout reflects dissatisfaction with the HOA board?" Karen's eyes went wide. She stammered. She turned. And then she snapped. "I am sick and tired of people thinking the HOA is some kind of villain," she yelled, hands shaking. "We're the only ones keeping this neighborhood from turning into a trailer park." Gasps from the crowd. A child asking mommy, "What's a trailer park?" Talia, ever the professional, kept her camera steady and let the silence hang in the air. Karen, realizing what she'd said, muttered something and stormed off, nearly tripping over a lawn chair on her way out. By the time I refreshed the post, the video had already been shared 42 times and had over 200 comments, some in defense of the HOA, but most were not. This is what we've been dealing with for years. Glad someone finally stood up to her. I was there. It was the most peaceful, beautiful afternoon our families had in ages. My kid made a card for our neighbor. We've never spoken to them before yesterday. Within hours, the story was picked up by a local radio blog. Talia's article hit the Gazette's front page by noon. The headline was perfect. From BBQ to backlash, how one neighborhood took their power back with ribs. And with it came momentum. That evening, an anonymous petition began circulating via email and text. The subject line was simple: "It's time to reclaim our HOA." The petition called for a vote of no confidence in Karen Dunn and demanded a special election to replace the board with one that values transparency, community input, and resident-led initiatives. By nightfall, nearly half the homes in the neighborhood had signed. I received no fewer than 30 knocks on my door. Some were to thank me. Some were to offer help. One man, Roger, who I'd only spoken to once before, handed me a lemon pie and said I was afraid to put up Christmas lights last year because of Karen. Not anymore. It wasn't just a movement. It was a shift. People were remembering what community felt like before fines and threats and cold letters taped to mailboxes. Karen's response was swift and exactly what you'd expect. She called an emergency board meeting Tuesday night, but the clubhouse was packed with more residents than it had ever seen. She tried to talk, but every sentence was met with questions, resistance, or outright disbelief. Someone asked why the HOA had never hosted a community meal. Someone else demanded to see the HOA's annual budget. And when the subject of the BBQ came up, and she tried to paint it as reckless and unapproved, Talia stood up from the back row, held up her press badge, and said clearly, "Would you like me to play the footage again?" Silence. Karen didn't resign that night, but she didn't speak again either. And the vote scheduled. 2 weeks from that day, the entire board would be up for re-election. As I walked home from the meeting, the breeze felt different. Not lighter, not cleaner, freer. I didn't start the movement. I didn't want power. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted to grill in peace. And somehow that had turned into a revolution. The vote happened on a Thursday evening 2 weeks later. A thin rain fell over Cedar Ridge, tapping on rooftops and umbrellas, washing pollen from the sidewalks and dust from the mailboxes. You'd think it might have kept people away. HOA elections rarely drew more than 20 votes. But not this time. By 6 o'clock, a line had already formed outside the clubhouse. Not just a line, a gathering. Neighbors stood with coffee thermoses and umbrellas chatting under porches, handing out pens, passing out cookies from Ziploc bags. Kids in rain boots stomped puddles. I saw people I hadn't seen since moving in 5 years ago. Retired couples, young families, the quiet tech guy from the cul-de-sac. Even old Mr. Pollard, leaning on his cane, had come out to cast a ballot. The HOA had never seen anything like it. Karen did show up. She wore her red windbreaker as if it were armor and stood by the check-in table with the rest of the current board. But this time, she didn't control the room. Her clipboard stayed closed. Her mouth stayed tight. I nodded to her when I passed. She didn't nod back. The voting process was simple. Homeowners in good standing cast 1 vote per property for up to 5 new board members. I wasn't running. I had no desire to. But 3 people from the BBQ were Tasha Marcus and a retired school principal named Grace, who had lived in the neighborhood longer than Karen had been alive. When the final tally was read at 8:13 p.m., the room erupted. Karen was out. So were Mark, Susan, and Dave. In their place stood 5 newly elected residents, all of whom had promised the same thing: to serve, not rule. The rain stopped shortly after the results were announced, as if the sky had held its breath and finally exhaled. Someone, I think it was Marcus, yelled BBQ at Ryan's, and laughter rolled through the crowd. I walked home in the soft dampness, my boots splashing lightly in the street gutters. My porch light glowed warm. Moose greeted me with a wag of the tail. I took off my jacket, lit a small fire in the backyard pit, and sat down beneath the soft creak of wind through branches. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't planning anything more. I was breathing, free. The next week, I found a note taped to my front door. It was handwritten in neat cursive on lined paper. Ryan, I'm not good at apologies, but I'm good at recognizing when I've been wrong. You embarrassed me, but you were right to. I hope this neighborhood is better without me in charge, and for what it's worth, I do miss the smell of that brisket. Karen. It surprised me. I didn't expect remorse, and maybe it wasn't, but it felt like something close. I didn't frame the letter. I didn't throw it out either. I folded it once and slid it into the back of my HOA folder, the same one with all the highlighted sections and city emails and notes from that long, long week. It didn't belong on the wall, but it had earned a place in the archive. 2 Sundays later, we did it again. Another BBQ. No flyers this time. No press. No permit needed. The new board had officially created a monthly open lawn social policy. Residents could use the HOA green space for any non-commercial purpose, without approval, so long as cleanup followed. Simple, human, fair. That day, we didn't just grill, we built. A new neighbor brought folding chairs and set up a board game station. Someone else ran a tie-dye table for the kids. A few teens collected food for the shelter again, just because it felt right. The fire department stopped by and let kids climb on the engine. And Karen came. She didn't speak. She brought a lemon tart and left it anonymously on the food table, then sat beneath the sycamore by the sidewalk, her gaze soft, her shoulders relaxed. No windbreaker, no clipboard, just a paper plate and a quiet place in the sun. No one called her out. No one laughed. No one gloated. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about return. Return to the idea of neighbors who knew each other, who helped each other, who saw shared space as sacred instead of policed, who understood that freedom isn't just written in rules, it's lived in rhythm, in ribs, shared in lawn chairs, dragged beside strangers who feel like friends. I was asked later in a community newsletter interview what I thought had changed Cedar Ridge more, the BBQ or the board election. I said neither. I said it was the moment someone said no to fear and yes to fire and food and each other. That's what lit the spark. And that's what we've kept burning ever since, because sometimes all it takes to bring people together is smoke rings a grill and the courage to say, this is our home too.